All right, folks, I've got bad news. People died today? People died today. Israeli army says 4 captives rescued amid heavy strikes in Gaza. Oh, that's a title. According to Hamas, this has led to the death of just over 200 people. A daring raid by the IDF to rescue hostages, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you get the deal.
And Sarah Khairat joins us now live from Amman, Jordan.
This has
Sarah,
broader implications.
Reactions coming in from families and advocates for the hostages that were freed?
Yeah, absolutely. Initially, we heard from the father of Noah. She had become almost the poster child of those that are held captive in that first ever video that had been released on social media showing her on a motorbike as she was being taken across into the Gaza Strip by the Hamas or Islamic Jihad fighters.
Yes, one of the more famous hostages, one of the hostages whose video was publicly broadcasted extensively, has been rescued.
Of course, thanked those that had helped get her and the other captives out of the Gaza Strip, including thanking the Israeli Prime Minister and the government. But we've also been hearing from one of the mothers of another captive with other members of the family standing behind her. Let's take a listen.
I'm a mother of one of the captives who was released today. He asked me to tell you that we are strong. I support our soldiers and I wish all the captives come back safely to Israel. I'd also like to say a big thank you to our military, to our soldiers. Thank you to the people of Israel who are strong and who share our joy today. We will never forget those captives still being held in Gaza, and we will continue our struggle and fight to return them back home alive.
You know, considering the fact that this is Al Jazeera English, I expected them to open with a slightly different take on this. Let me amend this, okay? We're going to put a pin in this. So basically, the raid was conducted. Hamas says 210 Palestinians were killed in a series of airstrikes in an operation to rescue 4 hostages. Now, Hamas also claims that in this daring raid, some other hostages were killed during the operation. Now, obviously, this is difficult to immediately verify. You know, at this point, the number of remaining living hostages is so few that we're pulling from an incredibly low number, right? I can't verify the statement. I can only say that if Israel did, in fact, kill more hostages in their rescue of some while killing a bunch of innocent civilian Palestinians, that would be like characteristic of them, you know? So you might be wondering, okay, so what are the broader implications with this? It's not just a hostage rescue, you see. The enormous death toll is bad enough on its own, but it seems like this was being done largely for political reasons. Well, obviously. Let me explain. So you might remember that a little while ago, Biden put forward a so-called Israeli deal that would secure a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel and would begin a process that would eventually lead to the release of the hostages. And Netanyahu, for some reason, told a family member of one of the hostages that he would not approve of that deal, which released the hostages, unless polling indicated that it would be popular. The reason for this being, of course, that Netanyahu is incredibly unpopular and aware of the fact that once the conflict ends, his ass is out. So by prolonging the conflict, you know, he would only end the conflict if he thought he could do so on a good enough note that it would endear him to the Israeli people, right? In addition, the bloodthirstiness and unwillingness of Netanyahu to commit to a war plan led to Benny Gantz, one of the members of the war cabinet, to make preparations to leave. Following this hostage rescue, Netanyahu has asked Gantz to remain in the war cabinet. It seems that was the purpose of this raid. My theory is that this was a hastily conducted raid on a site where Israel has known about the presence of the hostages for a long time, done in a desperate effort to convince Gantz that Netanyahu is in fact committed to the safety of the hostages. Please do not leave the war cabinet. If we break apart this coalition, that weakens me significantly. It's not really about like saving hostages or lives or anything, you know, anything like that. It seems like it was just like it's being done as an effort to bind this very, very fractured alliance. Cynical? Oh, cynical. I mean, that's an understatement, to be honest. He's canceled the resignation for the time being. Nice. Gantz postponed his announcement following the successful rescue of 4 Israeli hostages, but is expecting to pick a new date for it in the coming days. Okay, so it seems Netanyahu has succeeded in delaying the break apart of this war cabinet for a time, which is interesting. Yeah, he was expected to announce his resignation today. And coincidentally, this hostage rescue, well, yeah, which killed 200 plus people, maybe even other hostages, it has delayed his absence. So there you go, I suppose. Nice. Very well calculated, very deliberate, very strategic. Meanwhile, as we covered yesterday, America, or the Biden administration, has been warning Israel to please not get involved in a real military kerfuffle with Hezbollah, and of course, Israeli airstrikes in the region continue. They've been continuing for a while now. Like, this is not necessarily new, but it seems like tensions are continuing to escalate up near Israel's northern border. And as I said yesterday, a conflict between Israel and Hezbollah would be ruinous for Israel. I'm not saying Israel would lose. I don't think Hezbollah would, like, invade and take over Israel. That would be silly. I do, however, think it would be a mutually ruinous conflict that would not go particularly well for Israel. It would not be like a stomp, you know? It would not be good. It would be a Vietnam. In how ruinous it would be, certainly, yeah. So this seems to be where we're at right now. Netanyahu is desperate enough to keep the coalition together that he pulled out a extremely deadly 210 Palestinians, apparently, hostage rescue in a last-second effort to try to keep the coalition together. Something which, again, suggests to me that he could have rescued those hostages before and possibly with fewer casualties, and didn't, because, again, Netanyahu wants the war to continue. Do we have any evidence so many civilians or hostages have been killed? I mean, if anything, the current reported death count of Palestinians is an underreporting. Whenever there has been an effort to double-check the numbers provided by the Gaza Health Ministry, those numbers seem to be correct. The problem right now is that the Gaza Health Ministry effectively is ruined, and they can't really count casualties anymore, you know? It's the same dealio as with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where the official number of dead is like 17,000 civilians. It's not 17,000 civilians. They just can't count all the bodies. I meant in this raid. Well, that's the problem with Israel, man. They kicked out all the organizations that could second guess the Gaza Health Ministry, right? They won't let journalists in. They barely let aid workers in. Like, it's like they're creating a situation in which there's a black box where they can kill people, you know, without consequence, essentially. Agreed, Lily the Gaylord PhD. Thank you, thank you. Hamas has an incentive to be precise in their announcements. You know, like Hamas isn't like North Korea, where they're the like the not the martyr, sorry, that where they're like the maverick to the world or whatever. They're in a position where most of the world is incredibly sympathetic to the undifferentiated slaughter of the Palestinian people, and for that reason, it's in their interest to attempt to put forward the impression of them being on board with their measurements, you know? Will we eventually get a more accurate estimate of people killed? That really depends. If the Palestinians are forced out of Gaza and they just become diaspora that's spread to the four corners of the earth, maybe not. We might not. If they're allowed to remain in the Gaza Strip, we might be able to, because a future census would allow us to determine the excess mortality rate, how many fewer there are relative to how many were there before. There were before. Either way, it's not going to be a precise measurement. It's crazy to me that we might never know. Yeah, it's always like that with genocides, you know? Every genocide, even incredibly well-documented one like the Holocaust, like there's some variance, some tens of thousands in the case of the Holocaust. For historical death counts, you know, like ancient Chinese, like, you know, War of the Three Kingdoms shits, like how many, 1, 2, 3 million, you know? There's a lot of, yeah. Anyway, I want to finish the Al Jazeera English video because it's unusual for them to open in the way that they did. I wonder what they're getting to.
And Sarah, we understand that meanwhile, protests to bring the remaining hostages back home continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I was mentioning there that Noah Argamani's father had been speaking when he thanked the government, but he also reminded people that there are still 210 remaining captives that are still held.
There are maybe like 20 or 30 living hostages. I would be astonished if there were more than those. I mean, that's the number that we're working with, apparently. There might be a lot of bodies
In the Gaza Strip, saying that he was calling on them to get together and meet in Tel Aviv, known as Hostage Square. That's just outside of the Defense Ministry, for them to remind people that the rest of the captives are still being held in the Gaza Strip. But also, aside from that, we've been seeing there was a protest that had just started against the war in Haifa. That was dispersed very quickly and a couple of people were arrested. And then we've also been seeing video in the last few minutes in Tel Aviv of some anti-government protesters. Let me just remind you that on Saturdays we've been seeing two gatherings. First, an anti-government protest that takes place in one part of central Tel Aviv. They finish that and then they go and join tens of thousands of Israelis in Hostage Square to come together with the families of those held captive. They've been putting immense pressure on the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the government, especially as this ceasefire proposal that was pushed forward by Joe Biden, the US president, has come to a stalemate. Nothing has happened of that, at least just yet. And they
yeah, unfortunately, my enthusiasm for Biden's little coup de grace earlier doesn't seem to have been met with anything, which, I mean, I gave it a coin flip, man. 50-50. You get a good timeline, bad timeline. Oh, thank you, K-Comrade Robin Hood. That is exactly what I was about to talk about. The U.S. got Egypt and Qatar to start threatening Hamas officials with arrest and expulsion if they don't accept the ceasefire deal. Please do remember, as monstrous as Israel is, and they are, remember that the leadership of Hamas is also monstrous. The Palestinian people, not monstrous. The individual Hamas fighters, ranging from monstrous to freedom fightery. You know, really depends on the Hitlerite particles within how much they're motivated by anti-Semitism versus more legitimate nationalist interest against imperial forces, or colonial forces. The Hamas leadership? Hitler. Hitler. I tell you. Didn't Hamas already agree? Not to this specific deal. Qatar making clear to Hamas that failure to achieve a ceasefire would lead to their expulsion from Qatar. Gotta say, Saudi Arabia really leaning on this here. Like, America probably wouldn't have much of an ability to bully Qatar if we didn't also have the ability to bully Saudi Arabia. Like, Saudi Arabia also has an interest in the end of this conflict, so they're both bullying Qatar into threatening to oust the leadership of Hamas.
Know that the largest number of those that were held captive that came back alive was through the November ceasefire deal. Many of the complaints that the families have been saying is that those in charge are doing this and pushing ahead with the war for their own political gain, but also saying that they'd forgotten the #1 priority, which is to bring back those captives alive.
Hold on. From the Wall Street Journal, Biden enlisted Qatar and Egypt to pressure Hamas. It backfired. The militant group's leaders dug in after threats of arrest, sanctions, and expulsion from Doha if they didn't reach a truce with Israel. This is from an hour ago. Are they really committing that hard to the bit? Okay, I'm gonna propose something crazy, you know, and by the way, I'm being consistent on this because I have said some pretty wild stuff with Netanyahu, but when it comes to the leadership of Hamas, don't you think they could maybe, you know, like, hey guys, you're kind of making things a lot worse here, you know, you're not esteemed leader of a modern nation like Netanyahu, the rules are a little different with you, you know? Rules are a little bit different with you. Just saying. Yeah, you know, you take a little, yeah, you know. Just saying. I really, okay, comrade, that's interesting.
They are concerned, of course. Yes, there are 4 captives that had been rescued today, but as a result of that, more than 200 Palestinians killed. And they know that the captives that remain in the Gaza Strip are also likely to be killed by those same airstrikes that are killing the Palestinians. And as a result, they have been pushing as hard as they can to have that ceasefire deal accepted as soon as possible. Meanwhile, there had been a statement that was going to be held by Benny Gantz, one of the war cabinet members. He cancelled that, it seems, after this news of the 4 captives being freed. He had given the Prime Minister an ultimatum, which was by June 8th, you have to let us know what the post-war plan is, move forward, give us a concrete plan as what you are planning to do, otherwise I will quit the war cabinet. That's been, it seems, rescinded at the moment at least, but it'll be interesting to see. Yes, Netanyahu is seeing this as a big victory for him, but will the families of those held captives stop their protests? It doesn't look like it, but because they are still there in hostage.
Yeah, the protests in favor of the hostages getting home, for Bibi to accept the ceasefire deal, have been ongoing and worsening over time. Probably also an effort to appease them, though I don't think it's going to have much of an effect. It's pretty bad, guys. I don't know. We've had a lot of sort of false starts in a positive direction. It just, I don't know. It kind of seems like things are just getting worse and worse. Map of the ground in Gaza that IDF troops occupy today. Great account that tracks IDF units in Gaza. It's kind of crazy how little of an area they're capable of controlling, you know? I know they don't have their entire military here. It's just like, Jesus. I just keep getting reminders of how effectively the coalition of the willing handled Iraq, and I just can't help. I'm just reminded of how of how insane. Yeah. I know the situation is not perfectly equal. It's just, hey guys, remember when the Biden administration was like, we won't tolerate a major military operation into Rafah, and then the journalists were like, okay, but there have been tanks spotted in the center of Rafah city, and then he was like, have there been? Maybe not. And even if there was, like, whatever, man. That's cool. I know, K-Comrade, which is just not very much. My guess is one of the reasons why they've deployed so few troops into Gaza is because they want this to take as long as possible. Netanyahu has ordered the IDF to engage in this in, like, a deliberately slow and methodical way because, again, he knows that once things end, so does he. So, you know, he's like, oh, yeah, send, like, 5 guys in or whatever. Also, 12,000 troops is more than enough to cover more area than they've gotten here, I have to say. To remind everyone of how small all of this is, all of Gaza is exactly the size of one Olympic swimming pool, you know? And they say the IDF is competent, honestly. Yeah, it's a rough situation. Yeah. What do you want me to do? Cover good news? Find me good news. Whenever I ask for good news, people are like, look at this. And they send me something about one municipality putting up a bus sign or something, or like a bus stop. It's great. That is good news. I'm glad that, like, the, you know, 187 people who will be serviced by the stop will be able to, you know, get to the bus stop quicker. It's like, okay.